Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 5th season, we are looking at Joe Johnston's 2011 film, Captain America, The First Avenger. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
I'm Pete Wright, and I enlisted.
Today, we are talking about Minute 9, which begins with Schmidt killing the Tower Keeper and ends with the Doc telling Steve his asthma is enough to make him ineligible. Back today and the rest of the week, we have Kurtis Findlay from the Epic Marvel Podcast. Hello, Kurtis.
Hello, and I'm glad to be back for another round here. And let me tell you, when I was choosing the minutes, I love how you have that spreadsheet, and all of the people you invite get to pick which minutes you want to cover in these 5-minute blocks. And so I'm scrubbing through the movie, trying to find an interesting part. And of course, all the best ones are already taken. But I settled on this block of minutes because the first few minutes were so Thor heavy. And then the last ones are the introduction to Steve Rogers. It's like, this is great. This is some really good stuff to talk about. What a great chunk of minutes here.
It is a sweet spot. I'm actually surprised that it didn't go faster.
Yeah.
That these minutes were left unpicked. They're just fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are.
I'll tell you, the minutes that got eaten up very quickly were all the ones right around the transformation. Those ones seem to go very quick. But yeah, I was surprised.
That's what I looked first.
Exactly. And it's very popular. But this one we get to meet Schmidt, we get to meet Captain America or Steve Rogers. It's a great spread of minutes. So good call here. And just something I wanted to bring up, we were talking in a few episodes ago about Johann Schmidt. When did the name Johann Schmidt get attached to Red Skull? And it was in Captain America Comics issue 7. That's where Johann Schmidt first became connected
Golden
with the
Age.
character. Yeah, very early on.
Yeah, right.
Very early. Okay, so it's been pretty much his entire history has had that name attached to it.
Yeah, right. I mean, and still, there have been so many other names too, but it was nice to see, this name actually stuck from very early on at the beginning.
Okay.
So.
Good.
That's interesting.
We have the conclusion of the sentence. We had our Tower Keeper, Filch, tell Schmidt that you will burn, and he started saying, I already, and we get the conclusion of that, have. He already has burned. Implications here. It's a great little setup. We get these fantastic moments like that are kind of setups for payoffs later. What had to burn in order for him? And it's interesting because you get this. If you walk into this movie, you have no idea that Red Skull is a thing, that there's no character, or that you don't know about the character Red Skull as in the one with the red face. You just know that there's this Nazi-ish character here. When he says something like, I already have, there's an element that could just be kind of sold my soul to the devil sort of way, right?
Oh, totally.
I mean, I think we could read it that way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. That's exactly where I would go with it. I am already forsaken. That's the line that I heard.
Exactly.
When he said that, I'm already burned.
Yeah. And then later we find out it's also kind of a scientific experiment sort of way. So we will learn all that. And then he kills Filch. This is this film we're going to talk about being one of the bloodier Marvel films. There certainly is a bit of blood that we're going to see over the course of this film, starting right here as we have Schmidt pull out his gun and shoot the Tower Keeper dead. It's a great kill. It works. It's very effective, and we get that splash of blood that hits him. I want to talk about the splash of blood, but before we do, what's up with his little jaw flinch that he does there? Do you think, do you read it like he thought his mask was coming off? Did he think that he got splashed with blood? Do either of you have any little sense of that?
I thought it was he was reattaching his face.
Okay, so you thought that he felt like his mask was coming off.
Yeah, like the mask was slipping.
Yeah, I feel that too.
And you can kind of tell because this is one of the interesting things. The actual the cannon is firing off on the comically large tank, and what I love about it is the vibration of the cannon fire is actually shaking the camera, and maybe he thought that vibration was causing his mask to peel, and so he fixed it.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think it's there to, say, oh, there's something going on with this guy.
Yeah,
you get a little bit of like his red around his eyelids and that kind of stuff as well. And just to make it seem like this guy's something a little off about him.
That is a great makeup note too. That when his mask starts to peel around his eyes is just straight up horrifying look. Right? It's just such a nuanced, menacing, leaning in on menacing for this character, menacing touch that I thought worked perfectly. Having the mask peel around eyeballs, so gross.
It is great. We'll definitely get a chance to talk about that a little later in the movie. It's just so interesting. What I love about this, though, I mean, he does that weird little kind of adjustment on his cheek, but then we get the camera pushing in on his lapel pin, that Hydra lapel pin that he has that is now, the whole top of it is covered in Filch's blood. And, the Hydra lapel or the Hydra logo is a skull with those tentacles. And so here you literally have a red skull.
There
here.
You go. Look at that. Foreshadow.
I did not even connect that. That's a good bit, Andy.
It's so fun.
You stuck the landing.
And his sidekick, the Crimson Octopus as well.
Yes.
That's where they really
weird.
missed out in giving us an octopus for a pet. We really needed that. This is the end of this particular scene. Do either of you have any last bits that you want to talk about with Schmidt or the Tower Keeper or the finding of the Tesseract or our time in Tonsberg, Norway, March 9th, 1942?
Well, it was only blood spatter because I just didn't. I felt like the first thing I thought is, does blood really splash backward like that, given the distance he was standing away from Filch when he shot him? Like, that is the weirdest explosive round that would propel that much blood landing perfectly on the logo.
It is a Hydra bullet, Pete. It is not a normal
you're right.
bullet.
Right. It's like a worm. It goes into the thing and then shoots blood backwards. Is that how it does?
Right.
That's gross.
Yeah, people always get splashed with blood when they shoot people. That's like you always see that in movies.
And I always have this complaint. So nothing new.
You know what? Once you start shooting more people, Pete, you'll stop complaining about this. Okay, that's just a terrible
Yep, that's the worst.
Take that.
You did it. You took it to the weird place.
Okay. Any last comments on this section of the film, Kurtis?
Nope. I'm good to move on.
All right. We are moving on. We're moving to New York City and a jump in time. We are now June 14th, 1943. So we've kind of skipped ahead a little bit. And this is Flag Day. And we start with an establishing shot of the city from the Brooklyn side of the Brooklyn Bridge. But we end up in the enlistment office in Bayonne, New Jersey, which is really not that far from Brooklyn. But that's where we happen to be in this particular location. This is our first time really jumping over to the States in the period. What do you two think when you're looking at this shot of New York with the that kind of 1943 skyline?
Well, I absolutely love the aesthetic of the 1940s. It's just that the whole culture, I mean, except for, depression and war and all that, I just love the 1940s. So just being able to see the landscape like that. I mean, I have no real connection with New York. I've been there for, less than 24 hours one time. So I've only seen it in movies really. So, but it still is just it's a great skyline. But you'll have to tell me, Flag Day, is that a real thing?
Flag Day is a real thing here in the States.
Okay.
What a weird thing.
My sense of Flag Day, I'm going to look up what it is because honestly, I'm like, what is Flag Day for?
Is it a holiday?
My only experience with it, it's not like a day off sort of holiday, but it's something that you celebrate on June 14th.
Yeah. It's when the Stars and Stripes were adopted as our official flag.
Oh, okay.
So I don't. Why do we? Do you have a Maple Leaf Day?
We don't. No, we don't have a Maple Leaf Day. Not that I know of.
It seems a little bit on the nose, sort of egoic that we have a Flag Day, but I'll take it. It's fine.
My only recollection from my youth is like it was a day that we would have like a parade or something. Like it was one of those days where it was just like, it's a summer holiday.
Yeah.
And, it was either that or like a month later you'd have Independence Day and do a parade then. But it just was one of those things that, you'd kind of celebrate. And I don't really know why. Nobody really takes it off. It's just something that's there.
Do you get ice cream on that day?
I get ice cream every day if I can.
In America, you can have ice cream anytime you want.
So Flag Day, I guess the reason that the story shifts to Flag Day is because they wanted it to be on a patriotic day, right? They wanted to tie in some capacity, to give us some reason. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really call it out that it's Flag Day, but it is, if you look at the Marvel timeline, that's the date they picked for it. So
yeah.
As I said, we are in the enlistment office here in Bayonne, New Jersey, and it's not too far from Brooklyn. We're seeing a doctor who's calling people's names. This is labeled the 4F doctor, played by Simon Coons. He is calling names. We hear him call out Michael O'Connell, and we come in when he calls Kaminsky Henry, and we do see this person stand up and walk. So at least it's an unidentified extra. No idea who plays Henry Kaminsky. But and then we see newspapers, and so I wanted to talk about these newspapers before the more important things in this minute. We see a variety of headlines. U-boats torpedo ships off Virginia coast. Big losses for allies in Africa reported. Pile found water, big factor in Sicily. All of Italy thrown into deep gloom by Allied invasion. There's just a bunch of stuff going on here. Nazis retake Zitomir. What did you two think as you're kind of looking at all these different headlines as far as like tying, again, real world things into this Marvel movie?
Yeah, I liked it.
I've never heard of Zhytomyr.
Yeah, I had to look that one up too. It's a city in Ukraine, which kind of is like, oh, that's kind of actually appropriate for today as well.
Sure.
But I think, part of the picking of Flag Day is probably the timeline of events. If we looked up these dates, I'm sure that it actually probably falls right in line with where we are in the date that they've picked.
It's funny. I was trying to find some dates for some of this stuff, and I think that they were intentionally picking some things that were great headlines, but could be spread out over time.
Okay.
U-boats torpedoing ships off the Virginia coast. That happened over the course of years,
right,
that they were doing that.
Okay.
So that could work. Big losses for the Allies in Africa. That happened also from the 1940 through 43. So that certainly could work. One of them that I found, all of Italy thrown into deep gloom by the Allied invasion. That technically happened in July 1943 when we first invaded Sicily. So it's a little ahead of its time. It is what it is. When the Nazis retake Zitomir, that is the one that really kind of threw me for a loop, because they controlled Zitomir in Ukraine from July 9th, 1941 to November 12th, 1943. Then again, November 19th, 1943 to December 31st, 1943. So if it's saying they retake Zitomir, it should be November 43, not June 43. But
okay,
It is what it is. Come
on, they didn't get that right.
I know. Come on,
I'm going to make a whole YouTube video about how that's incorrect.
Yeah, somebody probably already has.
Yeah, right. Well, what I really notice more than anything is just how great the presentation of these soldiers waiting in line is, and the fact that we get the visual joke as we land on these two papers, that we have big paper, small paper. We see large man holding little paper, and then all we get our hands around the big paper to get our ultimate reveal of the diminutive Steve Rogers. I think that's a fun visual joke, that it's a little guy holding a big paper, and I'm okay with it. Like, it's cheeky and it's fun and funny, and we get a taste of his ultimate patriotism.
Well, and the gag, what's nice about it is the small paper, you can see the person behind it, but the little paper, but that big paper, it could be a big guy behind it. We just don't know. And so, it's a great way to kind of play this reveal. And that is the thing that inevitably, it's great that they kind of found headlines that kind of fit in with, roughly this time period. But really, it is for this big reveal that we have here. And if you'd seen the trailer for this, you probably already knew what was coming. But what's great about it is you really aren't completely sure when it's happening, if this is the moment or what. And so when you do finally get that newspaper reveal, when Stephen is called and you have him stand up, what a great reveal.
Yeah, for sure.
Kurtis, what was your reaction when you saw scrawny Steve here?
I loved it. Like you said, the trailer kind of gives a little bit away about how he would look and such, but just seeing, because I think at that point I definitely knew Chris Evans as Human Torch.
Yeah,
and
right.
So that's the visual look I'm expecting, and then to see this, like, he's like gaunt, like it's beyond skinny. They make a real big point of calling out how unhealthy he kind of looks, and it was great. What a great surprise! A great reveal. They played it up really well.
Did either of you watch like the behind the scenes about all of this, about kind of that creating this version of him?
No.
That was my next comment is how well do you feel like the technology landed? Because obviously that's not Chris Evans.
Well, what's so interesting is that they ended up doing a whole bunch of different ways to kind of create him. And I was really surprised because I thought it was all social network, face replacement, basically, that we have over the course of this section of the film with Scrawny Steve. Yes, they do that sometimes, but what they also did is they basically shot every single scene with Chris Evans playing the character. Then they shot it, and we haven't mentioned that Leander Deeny is the scrawny version. Then they would shoot it with Leander, then they'd also get plates, and then they would just like shrink Chris Evans and then gaunt him up a little bit with Leander's body. Sometimes they were doing the face replacement. Like they were doing so many different ways to kind of come up with this version of him. And so sometimes you're looking at it, you're like, it kind of is working, something's a little off, and then all of a sudden they're doing something else in like the very next shot. And so it tricks your brain into believing it. Yeah. And I find as I watch this, like it works exceptionally well, especially for something that's, 11 years old now. Like you watch it and you're like, they really pulled this off quite impressively.
Yeah.
They really do, especially in that next scene where he's just walking away. That's one thing. It's lit well. It the motion work is great as he crosses screen. But when we get that slow drop to him standing in line, looking up at the doctor, where we get a chance to actually stop and reflect. There's no way that's Chris Evans. I'm a shocked audience member. Look at my shocked face. That it really lands. And I feel like I had no doubt, no question that, even though I knew Chris Evans, it did not take very long for me to just believe that was who he was going to be.
11 years later, it still holds up really, really well. And this is kind of the beginning of Marvel doing this on a very regular basis of kind of plastering faces on other bodies or like making people look younger. I mean, I think in Iron Man 3, we get the young Tony Stark, right?
Yeah.
And that's only a couple movies from now. So this is kind of the start of them really playing with that technology, and I think they nailed it. I mean, we'll see what happens in another 20 years if we still feel that way, but I still think it holds up really well.
Yeah.
I mean, even when they're aging them, because, I mean, when they do the old Captain America that we get at the end of Endgame, I mean, he was wearing some age makeup, but they add even more age makeup on there. They gaunt him up. They do all that stuff. So, I mean, just the way that they manipulate in these little subtle ways, it's really impressive.
Yeah.
And the way, and in this particular shot where you get to see him so short as compared to the rest of them, what they were doing often is they would have Chris there, but he would be kneeling on like some sandbags. So he was at Leander's height and he would perform the scene. And then, they were just kind of like doing that combination. So he was still there doing the performance. So interesting. All right. Before we jump into the character of Steve Rogers, I wanted to real quick do the IMDb game for Steve and also for Leander Deeny. So Chris Evans, the two of you, without looking at IMDb, we're going to do the IMDb game. What are the 4 films that IMDb says that Chris Evans is known for?
Oh man, I am so not familiar with his filmography.
Wasn't he the guy in that pseudo superhero movie? What was it? All I can think of is Looper. It wasn't Looper. It was another thing. He had like kinetic brain abilities.
Oh yeah. What was that one called? It was Push.
Like,
Push? Is that what it's
Push.
Push.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say he was in Push. How about that? Definitely Push.
called? Okay.
Otherwise, it's what? It's like all Avengers movies.
Or Fantastic Four.
Right? It's like
Fantastic Four
you
could
think
be there.
Fantastic Four is up there.
And
Really?
maybe Scott Pilgrim? Was he was in that, right?
He's in Scott Pilgrim.
Okay, so I'm going to say Push. This is my vote. Push, First Avenger, Winter Soldier, and Civil War.
When you say First Avenger, you mean this movie, not the first Avengers movie.
Oh, dear God, no. I don't mean the first Avengers movie. No, I'm going to say it's the rest of them are either Cap or Avengers. So I think it's Avengers. Did I say Civil War and Winter Soldier and Push? That's my vote.
I'm going to say Infinity War, Captain America, Snowpiercer, and
yes. God, that's gonna. Oh man,
and
I live with regret.
I don't know. Avengers, the first Avengers.
Let's not forget he was in Knives Out and the new movie Lightyear.
Lightyear! I forgot about that. Okay, okay. Who? So what is it? What's the answer?
This is an actor who's been making movies since 2000.
Yeah.
And he was a little infamous with his role in Not Another Teen Movie. Cellular, he was in. I mean, he's been in so many things. 45 movie credits so far, with The Gray Man being the one that's most recently being advertised. It'll be out by the time this airs. I'll just tell you both. You're on the right track when you are talking about the Marvel films. That certainly is something that in these IMDb games for Marvel, those films rise to the top. And Harry Potter, if they're in Harry Potter movies, those always rise to the top as well. The 4 for Chris Evans. Number 1, The Avengers.
Okay.
Number 2, this movie, Captain America, The First Avenger. Number 3, Captain America, Civil War. Number 4, Avengers, Age of Ultron.
What?
Okay, well,
why is that
Avengers.
the 4th one?
I feel duped. That's weird.
Very peculiar that that's the one they went with there, but it is what it is. All right. Now, Leander Deeny, he plays Steve's double, but he's also an actor in his own right. Are either of you familiar at all with him as an actor? Otherwise, I'll just tell you what his 4 are.
Not at all. Never heard of him before.
No, never heard of him.
Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to pull him. More TV stuff, but the films that he's in, both of them are on here. Captain America: The First Avenger is his number 1. His second one is Atonement. He was in the Joe Wright film Atonement that had quite a bit of buzz. He was a police constable in that film.
Okay.
The third is a show called Endeavor. Are either of you familiar with the TV series Endeavor?
No,
I think it might be a BBC series, yeah. And last but not least is the show Merlin.
Merlin.
Oh,
that was an all right show. You know who was in that? Anthony Stewart Head was in that. Giles. He played the king, King Arthur's father. In that. That's fantastic. What was he? What did he do? Was he of note, or was he a secondary character?
He played someone named George.
Oh, George from Merlin.
George.
I regret this entire line of inquiry. Let's move on.
So
that's Leander Deeny.
He's a scrawny guy.
Yeah,
is that
go
what
ahead.
it is?
He's a scrawny guy. So they wanted to find somebody. He'll actually be in a role later in the film. Much like the body double for Social Network. That actor also got a chance to actually be in the film as a minor character. Same thing with Leander. We'll talk about that when it pops up. But otherwise, yeah, he is just performing everything that Chris Evans does in this early part of the film, except he's doing it with dots all over his face so that they can deal with the facial replacement when needed. So the interesting and role of people who play body doubles for these sorts of films. They never really get the recognition they deserve.
Yeah.
But the film wouldn't be the same without him doing what he's doing.
That's fantastic.
So, Steve Rogers. Let's start talking about Steve Rogers and his origins. Kurtis, you've read a number of the Steve Rogers comics. What's your take on kind of the origin of Steve and what he represents?
I think this is it's such a great origin story because Steve is the everyman. He's the person we all want to be, and especially driving home the fact that he is not a super fit superhero character. That's because that's, more representative of most people in the world. So have him being so patriotic and wanting to do his duty for his country, I think it rings true to a lot of people. I think that's, even if you're not physically able to do it, you still want to try and help out. It's an admirable quality to have. And this sets the stage for everything that Steve does moving forward in every Marvel movie. All of his actions are grounded in this 1 minute that we first are introduced to Steve Rogers right here.
Pete, what are your thoughts about Steve?
Yeah, it's an identity plate sequence, right? It's here's because we learn a lot about his obviously his integrity. He wants to serve his country. That defines his patriotism, but also his persistence, his absolute persistence to do this thing, and it sets up the call and response that we have with later with his when he gets involved in the scientists, because he says, give me a chance. He is fundamentally frail, and that's what gives us the fantastic sort of character moment when they're having a drink later, and ends up talking about how, I want you because you are the weak man, because you understand what it's like to be weak. This is his identity. This is his showcase where weakness equals strength, and it is perfect to your point. I mean, we absolutely relate to it. I don't care how tall or short you are. You can relate to feeling small. And we have to, the movie leans in on feeling small by showcasing him as small. But he doesn't necessarily need to be small. His identity is huge.
Well, that's what's, I think, so important about him as a character, is that he's small. I mean, you look at his health issues: asthma, scarlet fever, rheumatic fever, sinusitis. They have listed on the sinusitis. Chronic or frequent colds, high blood pressure, palpitation of pounding in heart, easy fatigability, heart trouble, nervous trouble of any sort, has had household contact with tuberculosis, a parent or sibling with diabetes and cancer. It's like there are so many things that they physically say are wrong with him. And what the film is pointing out, and what the character of Steve is pointing out, is that it's not about, it's that whole thing. It's not about what you are on the outside. It's about what you are on the inside, right? I mean, that's really what it is. And we see that play out over the course of the film. It's, I think it's a powerful stance to take. It makes very much sense for them to kind of keep this film grounded in the 40s. This isn't a modern film taking place in 2011. Having this character in that period of time when Americans had that sense of patriotism, fighting the Nazis, the good versus evil, it all feels so perfectly fit into this time period. It makes sense that they chose to do this as a period piece.
Yeah.
Kurtis, were you surprised when you saw that this was going to be a period piece, or did you think, why don't they just do Captain America as a modern film and just kind of update the character like they have with the other ones?
I was not surprised. In fact, I was relieved that they left it in the 1940s, because it is so central to Captain America's origin. And unlike any other character in the Marvel Universe their origin can happen at kind of any time, this one is so distinctly grounded and rooted in World War II that it kind of has to stay that way. And Stan, because that character in its publishing history kind of disappeared as the comic company was having some turbulent times. And then when Stan took the reins in the 60s and decided to bring him back and have him in ice, it was perfect, because that buffer between World War II and when he comes back from the ice can be any amount of time. So at that point, we can bring him up into the history. It's not like we're going to bring Steve back and thaw him out in 1964 or whenever it was. So, but yeah, the origin has to be here. And I'm glad that the entire movie, save for a couple minutes, is set in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice thing that they did keep it that way. We haven't really brought up the fact that, yeah, I mean, this wasn't a Stan Lee character. Like this, Stan Lee is so tied in with everybody these days with Marvel, and because he's had cameos and everything. He's very much that guy who's always wanted to do this. But this wasn't a Stan Lee creation. This was it Joe Simon and
Jack Kirby?
Kirby, right?
Yep. Yeah, they created these characters way back in the 30s. Oh, sorry, not the 30s, the 40s. They created Captain America in the 40s, and it was a product of the time. All of the comic companies were creating patriotic characters at this point because that was just the way the culture was leaning, and any characters who already existed were then enlisted in the army. Popeye the Sailor, for instance, became part of the Navy, the U.S. Navy, and
right.
A lot of those cartoons became war-related propaganda films for the American government, and even Superman joined the war effort and stuff. And so having Captain America, creating Captain America during World War II, it only makes sense that when we have a movie of him 70 years later or whatever, that we're going to keep it that way. And I think all of you Americans with your national pride, you wouldn't want it any other way anyway, right?
That's right.
Delightful troll. Delightful troll.
That's right. I will say it's pretty powerful that they came up with this character, and they have him, like the very first issue, which was March 41. They have him punching Hitler. I mean, we see the comic, like they recreate it in the context of this story, which I love that they do that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's before really the U.S. is really fully involved. It's before Pearl Harbor, and so I find it just very interesting that like it became such a vocal way for these artists and comic writers to kind of like, get this message out.
It's very true. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point that he was created before. And in fact, I think a lot of media companies were already kind of, because it's the big hot button topic of the day. It wasn't like a small thing. Even the war that's happening currently in Ukraine is small peanuts compared to how Germany was sweeping Europe at this time. And so I think that even though America didn't want to get involved, they still were like, we still know who the bad guy is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. So Steve is so this is we've been talking about this film so far. We know it's a period piece, but I do love the fact that they keep this very attached to that period. And they found, they've titled this Captain America: The First Avenger, letting us know that this is really kind of the start of all of this stuff that we've already kind of come to know since the very, that first post-credit sequence that we have at the end of Iron Man about the Avenger Initiative. This is really kind of when all of that gets started. So it's pretty cool the way they do this.
Were you able to find a voice credit for the person who's calling out Michael O'Connell and Henry Kaminsky?
It is our actor. That is he's credited as the 4F doctor.
Oh, it's the same guy. Okay.
We'll see why. Yeah, it's the same guy. Simon Kuntz is the guy who's calling everybody out.
Because I felt like there was a hint of Stan Lee in his voice.
There very much was. I know. I played that a few times. It really sounds like Stan Lee. Yeah. I'm like, oh no, it's just the doctor. But how weird is that?
It's just the New York in him.
I guess so.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out if Michael O'Connell or Henry Kaminsky were Easter eggs, if they're characters that we should, call out, or if they're like Marvel artists or writers or something. But I couldn't find anything. There's a Len Kaminsky who is a prominent writer in the 90s, but that's spelled differently.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too. Yeah, I didn't find any. I didn't find any connections there. I will say I was just reading some Captain America comics earlier today, and I did some of the early ones, and I did see that there was a Kaminsky character, and I'm like, oh, I can't imagine it was just it was just like a name in the comic. I can't imagine it was such a random thing to grab onto, but maybe it was. It's hard to say because it's not like they're blatant about calling anyone particular out.
I will say it's interesting. The Kaminsky, there was a Polish name, and so that character is enlisting to help out to join the war to fight against Germany, and they've already taken over Poland by this point.
Yep. So just a couple notes, kind of timeline-wise, as we were looking at all this. If you read that comic, I mentioned Captain America First Vengeance, which is a kind of a direct tie-in to this film. You do learn that Steve and Bucky, once they learn about the attack on Pearl Harbor, they end up enlisting, or they go to enlist December 24th, 1941, so a little bit after Pearl Harbor. And I assume at that point Bucky gets enlisted. Steve is rejected. He goes on to be rejected 4 more times, 4 more cities. This is, I guess, presumably his 4th rejection. And I guess, like, since then, I'm assuming that Bucky has been in basic training. I'm not really sure what Bucky's been up to because, as we'll find out, he's getting his orders. But, to be enlisted in 1941, and here we are, we're coming into this particular film in 1943. It seems like a lot of time before Bucky's done anything.
It does seem like Bucky has been off training because he comes back and he's uniformed and polished, and he also is the hero, as we'll see, shortly. He already has that hero thing. So my hunch is there's the story we never see is Bucky and Steve going off together to enlist, and Bucky getting enlisted the first time around, and our story follows Steve as he continues to try to pull one over on the enlistment. Officers.
Yeah, that's what's in the comic. It just seems like a long time from December 1941 to now, June 1943. I don't think basic training runs quite that long.
Well, it's basic and it's just intermediate, and there's advanced training and uniforming, advanced uniforming.
He's moved up to advanced.
But also that also means, because there's genuine surprise from Steve when he sees Bucky in uniform, so they haven't spoken for a couple of years here either.
It's been some time.
Right.
We do have this moment here as Steve is talking to the doctor about his parents, which was odd. What's your father die of? Mustard gas. He was in the 107th Infantry. His mother was a nurse in a TB ward. We do meet them in that same comic. Steve's parents are Joe and Sarah Rogers. His dad did die in World War I. Well, I should say, in some instances. In other instances, his dad was alive much later and was a little more abusive and stuff like that. There's different versions in the comics, but in the MCU, his father died in 1918. Same year Steve was born, July 4th, 1918, as we see on his little card here. So I love those little bits about kind of just getting a little family history here. But I don't know, the way that it plays, did either of you think, is he making all this up or was he being serious with all this? Because there's something about the way that Steve's kind of doing this, it feels like, is he faking all this?
Faking it to engender patriotic support of his effort to try to be a soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah, like just I felt like he was like showing how tough he is by being able to just say, yeah, my mom bit it. That kind of thing, right?
Yeah. I do, because I think that would be out of character to try to pull one over on anybody, right? He's a truth justice guy. Like, he's not going to lie to get into, even though that's his primary goal, he's not going to lie to do that. I just don't believe it.
Even though he's lying to get in, he's not going to lie to get in.
Yeah, he's not going to lie to get in. That's what I'm saying. He doesn't want his patriotic duty to be built on a foundation of lies. Even though it's kind of built on a foundation of lies. Shut up. Nobody asked you.
Because the end goal is he's fighting Nazis, and therefore it's an okay lie.
Captain number 1, he's punching Hitler in the face. Get to the punching of Hitler.
Captain America, I want to run, but I don't have anything else other for this specific minute, but I did want to throw this past you both. As likely you all have heard, because this was a big thing at the time. At the time the role of Captain America was up, they had it set to be a 9-picture deal. They ended up reducing it to 6 because so many people were balking at that. Now, apparently that wasn't a problem for Samuel L. Jackson when he signed on.
He'll do anything.
But a lot. Yeah, he'll do anything, right? But a lot of people...
He still doesn't know what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is about, by the way. Totally
he just
clueless.
comes in and out. But a lot of other actors had been in discussions and had been talked to. Some of these names, I'm curious if any of these stand out as somebody who could have potentially worked better than Chris Evans. I'm blending them together. Okay, I'm just going to run down this list. Tell me if you think any of these stand out. Sam Worthington.
Oh, yeah, I could see that, but he was getting busy with Avatar.
He's, somehow tied into that probably still.
Yeah.
What about Will Smith?
No. What?
Yeah.
No.
Interesting. I mean, I know Will Smith carries more connotations now than it did in 2011.
Well, yeah.
But it seems like an interesting direction to go.
I think that America would not have accepted that just based on color. They had to work up to that to get Sam Wilson in that spot.
Yeah.
Right. Here, I'm just going to go through these quicker because otherwise it's take forever. Tell me which ones stand out. Garrett Hedlund, Channing Tatum, Scott Porter, Mike Vogel, Sebastian Stan, interestingly, Wilson Bethel, John Krasinski, Michael Cassidy, Chase Crawford, Jensen Ackles, Kellen Lutz, Ryan Phillippe, Alexander Skarsgård, Dane Cook, and the two Jonas Brothers, or two of the Jonas Brothers.
Oh, you don't want to be that third Jonas brother.
Well, I think all of them probably fit the, average white American kind of mold, except for Will Smith. But as far as acting
there are people
goes,
who would argue that Will Smith also fits the average white American mold.
I mean, I couldn't have pictured Chris Evans doing this because I strictly knew him as Human Torch. I'm like, this guy's a goofball actor. I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a serious role, and it's hard
I mean, to your point, that's a really interesting thing because they weren't at this place where you felt like they were just kind of recasting roles willy-nilly. And when you have an actor playing a very prominent Marvel character, to all of a sudden say, let's take that guy who plays the Human Torch and let's just move him over to play Captain America. It does seem like very strange. I mean, and I know those films weren't quite as well regarded, but still, I mean, it's like, hey, Robert Downey Jr., let's take him and let's put him into this other role. It seems weird to me that was kind of the direction that they were thinking.
Yeah.
Well, Robert Downey Jr. had been around enough that we knew that he was versatile and could take on that kind of role. I mean, like you said, I think the what was it? Not Another Teen Movie and Human Torch as our exposure to Chris Evans. So it's like, I think people had the same reaction when Michael Keaton was cast as Batman. It's like, this guy's a comedy actor, and he's going to be Batman in this super serious Tim Burton Batman? I don't think so. But proved us all wrong. He was fantastic. Yeah,
that's a good comparison, actually. That works. If anything, it was just more the fact that he was the Human Torch that they brought him over. But it's funny because, and this is why casting can be such an interesting thing, because then you look at what Chris Evans has done in the role, and you're like, God, I can't imagine any other person playing him now. Like, he is just so perfectly cast for this character.
Yeah.
All right. I don't have anything else for this minute. Do either of you have anything?
So on the newspaper, I was also looking for some Easter eggs there. You're mentioning all the headlines, but there was one advertisement that I think it was a little blurry, so I had a hard time reading it, but I think it said Howard quality lasts.
I saw that and I couldn't quite make out exactly what it was, but if it was kind of I guess, do you think it would make sense for them to advertise as Howard
and not
quality,
Stark?
or would it be more? Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know how he was branding himself at that time. I can't remember if was Stark Industries already a thing in the 1940s.
Well, we're going to find out in a few minutes
Yeah.
because we're going to see the...
That's right.
Yeah, like they were trying to figure out what the brand is going to be. They just weren't quite there yet.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. And like I said, it was blurry, so maybe that's not at all what it said, but it looked like Howard to me.
Interesting.
Oh, it does say Howard quality lasts, but yeah, it does make you wonder. Like in my head, I'm like, because I was wondering that too. I'm like, is that Howard Stark, or maybe it's like just the Howard Johnson hotels or something like that? Who knows?
Quality. Howard
I don't
Johnson
know.
quality hotels.
Who knows? That's an interesting note. Pete, any last thoughts from you?
I'm out on asthma alone, man.
All right. Well, let's wrap up this minute. Kurtis, remind everybody where they can find you and learn more about your show.
Well, I have a podcast where we talk about old Marvel comics, the classic stuff from the 60s to the 90s. And I can't believe you call the 90s classic, but they are. You can go to epicmarvelpodcast.com, and you can also search for Epic Marvel Podcast on all major social media sites, and I'll probably be there.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Well, that's it. We will be back with one more minute this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, true believers.
I'm just too busy punching Nazis. Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Spread the News by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.